Hello and welcome back to the Air Armoury. I'm JRH and today I'm looking at an original Bügelspanner Air Rifle. In terms of background, before we look at the gun up close, I think it makes sense to look at exactly what a Bügelspanner is and who the maker's original are, as it's not the original that most people would tend to think of in terms of air guns. So Bügelspanner, as you've probably guessed, is a German term which roughly translates as trigger guard cocker or something similar. They are predominantly German-made gallery air guns made from around the mid-1800s to around the 1930s, although stock was still advertised for sale as late as the 1950s. They are very similar to American gallery air rifles, in particular what's known as the secondary New York City style gun that was made around the time of the American Civil War for use at indoor ranges. Now it's hard to say definitively which came first, but I think it's probably fair to say that the German and American guns had a mutual influence on each other. Now Bügelspanners were made by a number of different manufacturers, but most notably Oskar Will, and that takes me on to the manufacturers, or at least the branding of this gun original, as this is not the same original as used by Meyer and Grammelschbacher after the Second World War for their guns that were previously branded as Diana. Oskar Will was a renowned German gunsmith based at the Venus Waffenwerk plant, which was established in 1844 in what's now the town of Zella-Mehlis in central Germany. Now Oskar Will generally marked his guns as Original Will, but competitors made copies in quite large numbers, some of which were unmarked, but many of which were marked as simply Original. So this original gun is an Oskar Will copy. Now people naturally tend to see original and think Original Will, which is obviously why they mark them like that, but unless it says Will or Venus Waffenwerk anywhere on it, it is not made by Oskar Will, it is a copy. So let's take a closer look at this original Bügelspanner air rifle. So firstly, I think we need to look at exactly what a Bügelspanner is, or more specifically how it works. Now in very basic terms, they are spring piston underlever air rifles, but that oversimplifies it, as the spring, underlever and loading mechanism are not the same as we'd conventionally think of in terms of a modern spring piston underlever rifle. So in terms of power source, it has two opposing volute springs instead of a single coil spring, which you'd find in modern spring guns, and those volute springs push against a form of piston which, whilst it might not look entirely like a modern piston, it does the same job. So the spring and piston are housed within this relatively wide compression chamber. It's about 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters wide, and you'll also notice that the compression chamber is quite short at just 6 inches or 15 centimeters long, and that's because volute springs compress within themselves, so they don't need as much room as a coil spring, and because this isn't a particularly powerful gun, so it didn't need a big spring. Now with something this unusual, I would have liked to have taken it apart to show you inside, but it's not totally simple to take it apart, and some of the parts are quite fragile, so I don't want to put any extra wear on it if I don't have to, so I'm going to leave it in one piece. But I have found a picture online from Pyramid Air which shows you what the springs and the piston look like inside that compression chamber. The cocking lever for the gun is the trigger guard, and if I pull it down you can see that it extends back, which is normally hidden in the stock of the gun, and that gives you enough leverage to pull the piston back against the springs and cock the gun. And as I said earlier, Bügelspanner roughly translates as trigger guard cocker or something similar to that. And the trigger guard is then held in place by this spring-loaded catch underneath. And you can see this spur on the front of the trigger guard here, that was omitted from later guns. So once the gun is cocked, you obviously need to load it, and to do that you press this catch forward on the fore end, which releases the barrel and allows it to pivot open so that you have access to load a pellet directly into the breech of the barrel, and then you snap the barrel back closed. In terms of basic statistics, the length and weight did vary very slightly depending on the manufacturer and the features of each specific gun, but this particular gun is relatively representative of Bügelspanners in general. So it's 40.5 inches or 103 centimetres long, and it weighs 6.6 pounds or 3 kilograms. It has a 19.5 inch or 50 centimetre long barrel, and it is a smoothbore barrel. I think all the Bügelspanners were smoothbore. I don't think they made any rifled versions. And as you can see, it has an octagonal barrel. You don't see octagonal barrels anymore, except on reproductions of vintage guns, but 100 years or more ago they were relatively common on firearms and air guns. The reason being that a lot of barrel blanks were square, as that was generally easier to manufacture using the tools and production techniques of the time, and they then cut the corners off to save weight, thereby making them octagonal. As technology improved over time, it became a lot easier to both produce round barrel blanks and to machine square blanks down to round finished barrels, and the later made Bügelspanners from the 1920s and 30s generally had round barrels. With regard to caliber, most Bügelspanners, including this one, are in 2.5 or 6 1/3 mm, although later ones were made in 2.2, and they were intended to fire darts and pointed lead slugs. But it's very difficult to get hold of those these days, especially in 2.5, so I just shoot regular Diablo pellets out of it, and they seem to work just fine. Looking at the stock, it is a 2-piece hardwood stock having a separate buttstock and forend. The buttstock is, I believe, made of walnut, has some nice checkering on the grip and a slightly raised cheek piece, although not significantly so. Now if I turn it over, you can see that there is a big slot cut out from the underneath to give space for the cocking mechanism and the underlever trigger guard. The buttstock attaches to the gun with these two big screws which go in the top through this plate, through the wood, and then screw into this plate in the bottom, and also with a bolt and screw through the side of the butt to hold all of the mechanism in place. The forend is a lot lighter in colour, so I don't know if that's also walnut or not, but possibly not. It's got a nicely shaped rounded off edge on the front. You can see that there's a reinforcing metal plate within this forend underneath the barrel, and the forend obviously also houses the barrel release catch. Now this stock is pretty typical for a Bügelspanner, but some did have much nicer stocks with much more ornate shaping and inlays. There's quite a lot of metal work on the gun, which with the exception of the barrel is all nickel plated. Unfortunately this gun does have significant losses to the plating. So starting at the back, we have the butt plate and extended trigger guard. Then we have these quite substantial big metal plates on the top and bottom for holding the buttstock to the compression chamber, with another plate sitting between them. Then we obviously have the compression chamber itself, and then on the forend we have a thin plate on either side. This one obviously housing the catch for the barrel release mechanism, and the plate on this side allows access to that mechanism, which incidentally I think this screw on top is to do with. Now the trigger isn't too bad, and it is adjustable by way of this adjustment screw behind the trigger blade. Now I think that is adjustable for pull weight, but I haven't actually played around with it too much. Some of the nicer Bügelspanners did actually have double set triggers, and there's no safety on the gun. I don't think any of them had safeties. So in terms of sights, it just has very simple iron sights. The front is a beaded post, and that is held in place with a dovetail, so it can be adjusted for windage. And the rear sight is just a big notch, again held in place with a dovetail, and this one is actually quite loose, so you can easily adjust it by hand. Now whilst the sights aren't fantastic, there's nothing wrong with them considering the age, as they're pretty typical for the time period. That being said, some Bügelspanners had elevation adjustable rear sights, and some even had a peep sight. and it almost goes without saying that a gun of this age and style doesn't have the facility to mount a scope. Looking now at the markings, the main marking is original on the top of the barrel between the rear sight and the breech, and as I said earlier, this shows that it is an Oscarville copy, as if it was made by Oscarville it would say Originalville rather than just original. We then have some numbers stamped onto the metal plate under the barrel. I'm not quite sure if you can see them there, it's quite difficult to see. They are what look like a 4 and a 3 perpendicular to the barrel, and then either a 9 and a 0 or a 0 and a 6, depending on which way up you look at it, running parallel with the barrel. But interestingly, those two numbers are one above the other rather than side by side. Now I haven't read reference to those numbers being the serial number, although it's slightly odd that a serial number would be split into different sections going in different directions. It could be that the 43 or 43 is the serial number, and the 90 or 06 could be a date stamp, either for 1890 or 1906. I just don't know for sure what those numbers are. If it was a date stamp for either 1890 or 1906, that would probably be about right. I don't know exactly how old this particular gun is. I don't think it's a hugely early one, but it's early enough that it still had the octagonal barrel and is in .25 caliber. The last marking on this gun is this FS stamped into the left hand side of the stock. Now whilst that marking has certainly been on the gun a long time, I suspect it's not original to it. It's likely that that is an owner's mark of the shooting gallery that used to own this gun back in the day. The only other marking that I'm aware of on Bügelspanners, albeit that it's not found on this particular gun, is that the elevation adjustable rear sights on some of the Oscarville guns were marked with a 1901 pattern. So I'm now going to test the accuracy of the rifle. I'm going to fire 10 of these 19 grain Milbro Rhino pellets at one of these 14 centimetre square targets at a distance of around 7 or 8 metres. Here I have my target. Now the bulk of the pellets went in this nice tight group here, which is pretty good accuracy, but there are a few noteworthy strays, which isn't great for such a short distance. Now whilst the accuracy isn't too bad, there is a reason that I fired at a shorter distance of 7 or 8 metres instead of the usual 12 or so metres that I normally test at, and that's because at greater distances this gun loses accuracy very quickly and you can barely even hit the target with it at 12 metres. Although of course some of that is down to the fact that I'm using modern ammunition that this gun wasn't designed for, and the fact that it is smooth bore. So I'm now going to test the power by firing another 10 of these Milbro Rhino pellets over the chronograph. Here I have my chronograph test sheet, and I've already done all of my calculations. Now with those 19 grain Milbro Rhino pellets, I got an average velocity of 221.07 feet per second, with a spread of just 12.7 feet per second, the highest being 227.3 feet per second, and the lowest being 214.6 feet per second. Now using that average of 221.07 feet per second, that gives me a power of 2.06 foot-pounds. Now I'm not sure what power they were supposed to be when new, but as they were gallery air guns, they were never intended to be particularly powerful. And I'm pretty much stuck with this power, as I don't think I'm going to find a new spring for it anytime soon, but it really doesn't need to be any more powerful than that. So there you've seen the original Bügelspanner Air Rifle. Now whilst they are undeniably slightly unusual compared to modern air guns, I think they are fantastic old guns that would be a great addition to any air rifle collection. And as well as from a collecting point of view, I also really enjoy shooting this one. Now if you want to get one for yourself, they're not particularly common, but at the same time they're not ultra rare, and the price depends on 3 things really: the condition, its features, and whether it was made by Oscarville or not. So for a basic Vil copy in not great condition like this one, you can expect to pay maybe £300, £350. But for a nice condition original Vil gun with maybe a nicer shaped stock and double trigger, you can expect to pay anywhere up to maybe double that amount. The reason I originally bought this rifle was because I wanted an airgun with an octagonal barrel, and I wanted an airgun in 2.5 caliber, so this gun was two birds with one stone really, and I intentionally went for a lower end one as I didn't want to spend too much on one. Now, as with all my videos, I do a certain amount of research, but this one particularly so if you want to do any further reading yourself, I will put details in the description below of the sources I used. So, thanks for watching. I hope you found the video interesting. If so, be sure to like, comment and subscribe to the Air Armoury. And until next time, keep your arms in the air.